So this is a comic where Cyclops has to fight without using his powers. And I'll be honest with you guys, Cyclops is actually better without his powers than he is with his powers. And you guys will see what I'm talking about because he is a badass in this comic. It's amazing how awesome he is here. So this is the Cyclops miniseries from Marvel Comics. And while we did technically cover issue number 1, the only thing you need to know is that Cyclops was basically shot down in his Quinjet in the first issue, which is how we get here. But he doesn't have any of the other X-Men with him. And so he ends up realizing he's been rescued by a girl named May and literally removed from the wreckage. But because of the fact that he doesn't have his visor on him, he tells her, "Give me my visor," right? And that's when she tells him, "Look, man, this thing's been shattered to pieces," right? The visor was just destroyed when I pulled you from the crash site. So at this point, Cyclops cannot use his optic blasts. Keep in mind, he doesn't control them. So the instant he opens his eyes, he's going to incinerate whatever's in his path, just through the sheer nature of his concussive blasts. And so when she says that she moved him, Cyclops is kind of flabbergasted. He's like, "Look, you sound like you're 110 pounds soaking wet. So no offense, but how in the world did you move me?" And she just says, like, "Maybe you're not really that heavy at all. Did you ever consider that?" And so that's when Cyclops is like, "Okay, so you're a mutant. And in some capacity, your powers are tied into super strength." Now, the funny thing about this is that May kind of rejects the idea of being a mutant to a degree, in the sense that she harbors animosity. It's not a super in-depth part of her character, but it is interesting because she rejects it and just says, "No, no, 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 no. I'm not a mutant. I'm just May," right? Nobody painted Mutimobile on my dad's car until you guys pulled your whole desert island clubhouse crap. And that's where Cyclops says it was called Krakoa. But if you know that, then that means I probably don't need to introduce myself. And she's like, "No, I know you're Cyclops," right? And she's like, "And since you're here, you might as well make yourself useful," because she's trying to light a campfire, and Cyclops seemingly would be able to give her the ability to do that. But that's when you kind of get an explanation of what's going on here, right? That what she says is, those guys who shot you down, right, that they kidnap a bunch of us from parks and rec centers, schools, they're basically cyborgs, right? Half man, half machine. And Cyclops is like, "Reavers," right? Damn it. Because Cyclops didn't initially know who shot him down. He just knew the Quinjet was hit by something and then went crash landing into the ground and then woke up here. And so at that point, May, not really knowing who the Reavers were up until this point, is like, "Okay, so you know who these guys are." And Cyclops asks, "Is one of them a tall blonde guy?" Basically, he has the facial expression of a Karen, like he always wants to talk to the manager. And May's like, "Yeah, he sucks." And Cyclops tells her that's Donald Pierce. Now, Donald Pierce is a long-standing X-Men villain in Marvel Comics and has been since the days of the Dark Phoenix saga. He was originally part of a group called the Hellfire Club, which was basically a handful of mutants trying to control the world from behind the scenes. He was ousted from the Hellfire Club when they learned that he hated mutants. But the Reavers are historically led by Donald Pierce. And the idea is that he does exactly as Cyclops describes it, right? When Cyclops says, "I don't know how he does it, but he always manages to find these marks so desperate to assert their humanity that they will surrender it at their first opportunity." And so in effect, he makes cyborgs. He converts people into cyborgs and then gives them enhancements. Sometimes it's increased strength. Usually it's like weapon systems attached to them, different things like that. But they go forward and attack the X-Men as often as possible. They're not the biggest villains the X-Men have, but they are pretty cool for the most part in Marvel. And so at that point, Cyclops asks, how many are there? Because within Marvel, the number of Reavers changes from storyline to storyline. Maybe there'll be 7. Sometimes there might be 3, right? So it just kind of shifts depending on who's writing the story. And May tells him there's 6, including Donald Pierce himself. They've got us mining the mountain for something, some kind of metal, but even then she's not entirely sure. Now, Cyclops guesses that it's vibranium, but again, May doesn't know the answer to that question. And in fact, nobody ever really does. She just says, "We weren't taking it random. They chose us to help them dig farther and faster. Every time we get out of line or pass out, they zap us with these shock collars." And so Cyclops, in hearing that, immediately tells her, "You have to take it off," right? It's not just a collar for control. It's a tracking device. But of course, she says that one of the mutants who was there, a kid named Alvin, had shorted the collar out, which is how she was able to escape in the first place. And that's when you kind of get into a bit of a rift between the two, because Cyclops wants to go back to the Quinjet because his ruby quartz glasses are there, which, as most of you guys know, he can put the glasses glasses on and at least control his eyesight. So at the very least, he can look at May without having to worry about blowing her to pieces with his concussive blast. On the other hand, May wants to go rescue her friends, because the longer they're being held by the Reavers, the more likely they are to be worked to death, or something along those lines. She cares about them, right? Which makes perfect sense. And so when she kicks a tree in half, using her super strength, she tells Cyclops, I'm not one of your X-Men, right? You do not get to order me around. And so at that point, you pick up with one of the Reavers who's on the hunt, trying to find Cyclops at the crash site, and he contacts Donald Pierce and telling him, look, Cyclops isn't here, right? And his visor is shattered into pieces, so what it looks like is Cyclops can't see. Now, in zone, the Reaver who's here is able to pick up on that to a degree, but he contacts Donald Pierce, and Donald Pierce tells him, no, you were supposed to track the girl. But that's when Endzone tells him, and her tracks led me here. So either they cross paths and they split, or they're traveling together. But one way or another, if we find her, we find Cyclops. And if we find Cyclops, we find her. But when he talks about the idea of the visor, that's when Donald Pierce says, I think he's blind. I don't think he can see. And if he can't open his eyes, that makes him easy prey. And so where the two of them kind of split off and did their own thing, you pick up with May where she's constantly being followed by one of these deers. It kind of talks to it for a moment, you know, like, you've been following me for a long time. Well, I'm sorry, buddy. Like, I don't really have anything to eat. And it's a really beautiful and tender moment until the deer gets blown to pieces. It gets destroyed by Endzone, which is actually a pretty sad thing. It's not really funny, but it's a pretty sad thing, right, to see this deer get destroyed. So at that point, May's fleeing for her life, right? I mean, she does not know what to do against these guys. But there's also a really cool caveat to her powers, because when Endzone shows up here, he asks her, where's Cyclops? I know he's with you. Tell me where he is. Like, I'll destroy you and him, or I'll destroy you. It doesn't matter. Either way, you are both going to die. But when he finally gets his hand on May and goes to Caesar, Cyclops whistles. And when Endzone picks up on it, that's when he was like, got you, right? Immediately he finds out where Cyclops is and goes to chase him down. Now, in that moment when Endzone goes into the woods, Cyclops circles back, comes up behind May, takes her by surprise, but does silence her for a brief moment. The problem with this is that Endzone fires off this blast, which knocks Cyclops down and actually ends up impaling Cyclops to a degree with a piece of wood, but he fights through it. And that's kind of the cool thing, is Endzone goes to grab Scott. But keep in mind, Cyclops has fought Reavers multiple times. So while the form and function of the Reavers may change, which is to say how they're designed, how they're built, what weapon systems they have, at the end of the day, it's usually all the same basic concept, right? That pickup trucks and cars and SUVs are different, but they all rely on engines and they all have a transmission. And that's what Cyclops uses to his advantage here. That when May comes running up with a burning piece of a branch and at the very least shoves it into the face of Endzone, which is enough to distract him, Cyclops jumps behind him and then starts tearing out the hydraulics on his back. And at that point, Endzone is like, my legs! What have you done to my legs? And just goes like falling off this cliff. But that's when you get to the caveat with May's powers, because when Cyclops recovers, right, just kind of sitting on the ground and bleeding out from the piece of wood that's in his back, as Endzone goes crashing down off of this cliff, that he asks May, where were you 30 seconds ago? Right? Like, you could have torn that guy apart if you wanted to. And what May says is that her power comes and goes based on how scared she is. If she's too terrified, her powers won't activate because her cortisol levels skyrocket, which blocks her powers. But if she's calm, then she can use her super strength, which is actually pretty cool because it's going to create a bit of a bonding moment between the two of them here in a minute. But this leads to Tearjerker, another one of the Reavers, discovering the body of Endzone. Now, Endzone's not dead, although in a minute he's going to wish he was. A little bit of the behind the scenes here is that in issue number 1, we learned that Endzone would just torment Tearjerker, essentially, right? He would just like steal enhancements from him. He would just make life hell for him, that kind of thing. I simply say that to say Tearjerker has a vendetta. So when he shows up here and he sees that Endzone is in a weakened state, then it's his chance to pounce and to take advantage. So when Endzone's like, buddy, you got to get me out of here, man. Like, you got to help me. The response to Tearjerker is he gets on his two-way. He contacts Donald Pierce and is like, oh man, you know, Endzone came across Cyclops. I guess he didn't make it, and then starts tearing apart Endzone for parts. He starts like taking back all the stuff that Endzone took from him and basically kills him. And then at that point, walks away and goes after Cyclops directly. And so because of the fact that Endzone is dead, Donald Pierce sends out another one of his Reavers, Blitz Tempo, to investigate the whole site. And when Blitz gets here, she chimes in to Donald Pierce and says, so I found End Zone, and it looks like Tearjerker stripped him for parts. And Donald Pierce is like, well, I mean, you guys know the rule, right? Like, if you die out in the field, your teammates can strip your body and use you for parts. But the thing that she says is, it doesn't look like that's what happened. It looks like he didn't die. It looks like Tearjerker killed him and then stripped him for parts. And when Donald Pierce asks, how do you know that? It's because what End Zone did was create a kind of repeating message just before he died saying, Tearjerker did this to me. And while this doesn't seem overly important, given how Donald Pierce treats his Reavers, it is important in terms of how the other Reavers view Tearjerker. A Reaver that would destroy another Reaver who was alive and then strip him for parts is considered the ultimate betrayal. That's a guy that you can't trust. And so what we end up doing is switching back over to May and Cyclops. And this part is hilarious. And the reason why is because May keeps asking Cyclops about Krakoa, specifically about resurrection. She's like, so you don't remember being dead at all, right? Like, the whole resurrection thing always just kind of creeped me out. Does it feel like waking up? Is it like rebooting a computer? And Cyclops is like, okay, look, that's enough. He's like, we've been walking around for hours and you've done nothing but interrogate me about Krakoa. Are we getting any closer to the Quinjet or not? And May doesn't immediately answer him. And I want to talk about this exchange here because she says, I begged my parents to let me go to Krakoa, but they told me to wait. They said that it was not a decision that I should make in junior high. So I waited. But by the time I was old enough, you'd let the world take it from us. And Cyclops says, nobody let anybody take Krakoa. You weren't there. And she's like, yeah, but I'm aware of what went on. The last time our people built something proudly and unapologetically instead of just surviving, and I missed it. Right? It pisses her off to no end. And this is one of the cool elements of the comic because it brings in a bit of the holdover and some of the things that transpired over the course of Krakoa and actually predate Krakoa. Because May says, yeah, I'm asking you about Krakoa because I'm curious about it, because I wasn't able to be there when Krakoa was going on. But to answer your question, yes, right, we are close to the Quinjet. But then at that point, Cyclops starts coughing up blood. And in that moment, May, having no clue what's going on, Cyclops tells her, I've got wood shrapnel in my back, so I need you to use your super strength and to pull this out. She tries, but it's not working. And that's where Cyclops uses the red triangle method. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what this is, the red triangle method was first referenced in 2017 in US Avengers. But the long and short of it is that it's basically a way to block psychic attacks. The most notable example of this was during Fall of X, when it was being used by a handful of mutants when Xavier was forced to send most of the mutant population from Krakoa through the Krakoan gates and into the White Hot Room. During the time of the story, it was basically a way for Marvel to clear the landscape of most of the mutant population and reduce the fightable roster of the mutant population down to a handful. And so think of it as the X-Men equivalent in Marvel Comics of when they killed Thor in Thor Disassembled and sent the Incredible Hulk into space so they couldn't actually be participants in Marvel's Civil War because they would have changed the tide. Right? But the fact remains, the reason why this matters is because Cyclops tells her, right, listen to me, I need you to try something, right? It's something that I use to help me manage difficult moments. I need you to close your eyes and picture a red triangle. And he says, red for danger, the strongest shape there is, which she does. She pictures it. And he says the triangle is composed of letters, red letters on a white background. And he says, now, look again. The letters form the word resist. Do you see it? And she says, yes, I see it. And that's what restores her ability to use her powers. And so when she pulls it out, Cyclops is bleeding all over the damn place, right? And she's like, are you going to bleed out on me? And he's like, no. In my utility belt, I have a wound sealant, right? It's pretty hardcore stuff. And so once this is applied, she asks the question, what just happened? And he says, I taught you a rudimentary defense protocol for psychic attacks. And where she says, I wasn't really under psychic attack, he says, actually you were. You were under a psychic attack from yourself. This is really cool. I really love the way this exchange is handled. And so Cyclops tells her, I am going to get us home. I promise you. But you have to do exactly as I say, which means we need to go to the Quinjet. Now, once they get there, the whole thing is clearly a trap, right? Cyclops walks into it, and it's like the scene from Ninja Turtles 2, right? You know, it's a little too rough, right? That kind of thing. Like, the whole thing is just so convenient, because it just is open out there. And Cyclops knows enough about Donald Pierce and the Reavers to know the first thing they would have done was investigate the crash site, and they would have left someone here expecting Cyclops to return to it, especially with Cyclops knowing that his visor is destroyed and the destroyed visor is at the crash site. They would put two and two together very, very quickly. And so as he makes his way through here, he's like, something's not right? This all feels gift wrapped. There's no threats. I don't hear anybody attacking us or anything like that. And so that's when Tearjerker makes his move. And this is when Cyclops gets dope, because in this moment, Cyclops has had enough, right? He has basically put up with it all. And when Tearjerker comes out with Cyclops' ruby quartz glasses, he crushes them in his bare hands. At the same time, Blitz Tempo shows up and grabs May. And that's when she tells Tearjerker, okay, so you were supposed to report in, but you didn't. So let me guess, you were going to bring Cyclops in on your own and take the credit for yourself. And Tearjerker's just kind of like, I mean, yeah, why not? Why not do that? And so in this momentary argument between the two of them, Cyclops tells May, use the red triangle. She does exactly that, and then punches a hole through Blitz Tempo, kills her by accident. She doesn't intend to, but ends up killing her by accident. And so in the face of that, she ends up taking off running, right? She's just like, considers herself a monster. She's horrified by what she's done. She bails and leaves Cyclops to his fate with Tearjerker. But Tearjerker looks down and is like, well, she won't get far, right? As for you, Cyclops, sadly, I think this is the end of our time together. And Cyclops is just like, you idiot, right? He's like, I tried to do this the right way, the polite way, just like I was taught, but you wouldn't let me. And fires off his optic blast and hits Tearjerker with it. Now, it's not enough to destroy him, but it lights up the forest. I mean, everything turns red. Not only that, in this moment when May bails out, Donald Pierce shows up, snatches up May, and takes her back to the mines to put her back to work. And so at this point, now it's a rescue mission, right? Cyclops, in realizing that May's not out there, quickly figures out that May's been taken. So then he turns his attention over to Tearjerker. I love this exchange between the two of them, right? Like, Tearjerker calls out and is like, hey man, help a guy out, right? Like, you really got me good, right? I didn't think you had it in you. And Cyclops is like, nobody ever does. And so Tearjerker's just kind of like, yeah, well, you won, right? Now come here and give me a hand. And he's like, mind my gun arm over there, right? I wouldn't want you to trip over the damn thing. And Cyclops just like goes to the gun because literally Tearjerker told him it was there. And Cyclops is like, oh, yeah, I think I'll focus on that instead. And so Cyclops bends down to pick it up and is like, yeah, this will work. And Tearjerker's like, give that thing back, man. And Cyclops asks him, he says, there are 3 more of you Reavers, correct? And Tearjerker doesn't want to give him any answers, right? And he just says, like, I mean, you're the hero, right? Like, you're supposed to do hero stuff, which means helping me out. And Cyclops is like, you know, sometimes I'd like to be the hero, but people like you keep reminding me that I'm a soldier. So he like picks up the gun, puts the bandage back on his face, grabs Tearjerker and drags him along for what's basically this rescue mission. And I gotta be honest, man, like this shot right here, when Cyclops is like walking along with the gun in one hand and like dragging Tearjerker in the other, I really hope Sideshow Collectibles makes something out of this, because that would be incredible. And so as night falls, you end up picking up with this moment where it turns out that what's been happening in this time that Tearjerker has both been guiding Cyclops to where the cave is, as well as just being dragged behind him. Tearjerker's just been telling like anti-mutant jokes. And he gets to the final one and he was like, okay, I saved the best for last, Cyclops, right? What's the difference between Genosha and a porterhouse steak, right? Do you give up? Genosha only comes well done. And Cyclops gets pissed, which makes sense. Tearjerker is making light of the massacre of Genosha. 16 million mutants were killed by Cassandra Nova's wild sentinels, and Tearjerker's making light out of it, right? So of course, Cyclops is pissed, and he says, I have been stabbed, singed, blown up, twice, and I've had to endure field surgery from a kid, and so I do not have to listen to bigoted Uncle Tom jokes from the likes of you. So if you keep it up, I'm going to show you what 2020 vision looks like. Right? I'm gonna show you what it looks like to reach out and touch somebody, right? And so at that point, Tearjerker's like, okay, look, no more jokes, right? I promise you, I will just lead you to where we need to go. And so with him just like being sat up against a tree, Cyclops starts rigging up these booby traps. And he says, so I heard what the other one said to you, right? Blitz Tempo. Was that her name? You killed one of your own for parts. And where Tearjerker goes to plead the case, like, hey man, he took some of those parts from me first. Cyclops is like, look, I don't really care, right? The more you Reavers tear each other apart, the more soundly I sleep. But I am willing to bet that Pierce's other stooges are not going to welcome you back with open arms because you destroyed one of your own. And Tearjerker initially dismisses him and is like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. But Cyclops tells him, listen to me, Tearjerker. He says, I never understood why so many of you are prepared to mutilate yourselves for the chance to kill us as mutants. My wife thinks the pain justifies the hate retroactively, that desecrating your own bodies makes the imagined injuries that you've suffered at our hands real. Somehow. Personally, I never really found you that interesting, but I fought a lot of you, and here is what I do know. All of you cherish what you have left of your humanity. Every tooth, every tendon, every eyelash. None of you really wants to die. And where Tearjerker tries to chime in and talk about Donald Pierce, Cyclops cuts him off and is like, Mr. Pierce and I go a long way back. And I promise you, he despises weakness, and you let me beat you. So what do you think he's gonna do when he finds you? You have no options. Your own teammates are going to destroy you because of what you did to Endzone, or Donald Pierce is going to kill you for being as weak as you are. So you only got one option, and that's to work with me. And so he tells him, you are going to tell me about the capabilities of every Reaver still standing, and then you're gonna help me set a trap for him. And so that's when you pick up with two more Reavers, Coldcut and Sockeye. Yes, Donald Pierce named one of his Reavers after a sandwich from Subway. And so when they track down the beacon of Tearjerker, they chime into Donald Pierce. And when they describe the scene, Donald Pierce is like, it's a trap. It was a trap set by Summers. And they ask, like, what do you want us to do? And he's just like, spring it. Right? There are two of you and one of him. You guys should be able to take out Cyclops fairly easily. And so that's exactly what happens. They literally walk up to Tearjerker, and at that point, Tearjerker apologizes and says, hey man, I'm really sorry. And Sockeye's like, for what? And Cyclops says, for this, and just comes plunging down onto Sockeye, gouging into this guy's back. And because he's part cyborg, he loses control of himself and starts firing shots all over the place. Not only that, in this momentary distraction, Cyclops grabs Tearjerker and runs off into the woods. It's like a scene out of Predator, because then Coldcut grabs the gun off of Sockeye, literally rips it off of him, takes the gun for himself, and goes bolting through the woods after Cyclops and springs a booby trap. Right? And this booby trap is rigged to one of the cannons that Tearjerker had, as well as a flamethrower. The cannon goes off, the flamethrower fires, and while Coldcut isn't killed, it's still a pretty dope distraction. And so in that moment, Cyclops goes and grabs one of the cannons that belonged to Sockeye that was taken by Coldcut. And he asks Tearjerker, what is this thing? And Tearjerker's just like, a plasma cannon. And Cyclops is like, I can use that, and fires the thing off at Coldcut. Which is amazing. I told you guys, this story is fantastic. And so with Coldcut completely incinerated, Cyclops looks back at Tearjerker and is like, are you still here? And Tearjerker's like, define here, man. There's not enough of me left to fill a shoebox. And Cyclops is like, look, if you're looking for sympathy, I left it in my other pants. Now, let's get out of here. And so at that point, we switch back over to May, when she's been captured by Donald Pierce and being made to work in the cave. Now, the cool thing about this is that May does try to lead some kind of rebellion against Donald Pierce. It works momentarily, but understand, Donald Pierce has faced off against the X-Men and held his own. A handful of mutant kids don't really stand a chance against this guy, but it is cool to see them try. The downside of this is that in this battle, Alvin, right, the one who has the ability to whisper a kind of sound, he ends up getting killed. But that was the benefit of him, is because when they initially launched this attack against Donald Pierce, what you ended up learning is that they were able to use their powers and attack Pierce in the first place, because what Alvin had done was that while his whisper does have the ability to bore through rock, it also has the ability to jam signals. And so it jammed the signal that Donald Pierce was using to activate the collars, which is why when they launched their little rebellion in the first place, and Donald Pierce tried to fire up the collars, they didn't work. And so Donald Pierce does the only thing that makes sense. He kills Alvin on the spot, and then as soon as Alvin's dead, he reactivates the collars. But because of this fight, and because of the damage it had done to the cave, Donald Pierce looks over and realizes there's a glow coming out of a hole. And within this glow is a metal. The metal of the gods, as he describes it. Now, I do need to point out, for those of you guys who are following the Wolverine comics, this is not adamantine. And for those of you guys who don't know what I mean, I will post the Wolverine playlist down in the description so you guys can get caught up if you're interested. But for those of you guys who don't know what I'm talking about, as most of you guys know, Wolverine has adamantium bonded to his skeleton. Adamantine is basically a very, very old metal and is far more durable than adamantium. And in fact, it's the metal that Hercules' mace is composed of. Now, we don't quite know what all Marvel's gonna do with it, if they're gonna take adamantine and bond it to Wolverine or something like that. We're just kind of waiting to see how that whole plot unfolds. What's actually going on here is this is Uru metal. This is the metal that Thor's hammer is composed of. And Donald Pierce kind of explains it here. He says, I know that you all, like you mutants, are not technically humans, but I'm glad to have you here to bear witness to this moment all the same. By rights, this ancient mineral deposit shouldn't even exist. It belongs to that slippery realm of fable and folk memory. In Teutonic cosmology, it's the ore from the rock of creation itself, so unyielding it can only be worked by the dwarven smiths of Nidavellir. They call it Uru metal. In one of the lesser-known Eddas, it's even claimed that the weapons of the Norse gods themselves were forged from it. Now, I think that's pretty interesting. It's hogwash, naturally, but when I heard about the strange metallurgic properties of the rock buried in this mountain, I had to see for myself. Now, a lot of you guys who are looking at this are probably like, no, that's not hogwash. How could he not know that? I mean, Thor's hammer is made from Uru metal. Like, how could he possibly not know that? Thor's one of the most powerful superheroes in existence in Marvel Comics. Lest we forget, during the Death of Thor storyline, going into the Mortal Thor storyline that Marvel's currently publishing, Asgard was cut off from the realm of Midgard, and all knowledge of the Asgardians and their history went with it. So as far as the Marvel Universe is concerned right now, no one knows who Thor is, no one's ever heard of Thor, no one's ever heard of the Asgardians, and no one knows about all the stuff that comes with it. All you really have with Thor right now is just him operating as Sigurd within the Mortal Thor series. It's very easy to forget about that, and I love the fact that it does get tied in to this particular story. But what's more important here is that Donald Pierce had learned an enchantment that would allow him to activate and use the Uru metal. And that's exactly what happens. He puts his hand to it, he utters an enchantment, and the metal bonds to himself. And so in the midst of all of this, you do have May that tries to lead an escape for all these mutants, but then a cave-in happens. And so them being trapped in the mountain, there's no real conceivable way for them to get out. Mateo, who basically has a power that hasn't really been defined yet, seems to be the one way they could escape. But his concern is that it depends on how much rock there is, right? There could be 30 tons of rock between us and daylight, or 30,000 tons. There's no way to know for sure, but I can try. But in the middle of all this, Cyclops chimes in on the other side of the cave-in and is like, hey, is May with you guys? And they're like, yes, May's with us. I mean, she's holding up the cave, but like, we don't know who you are. And so Cyclops is just like, stand back, right? And then just like blows away all this rock and rubble and says, I am Scott. I'm a friend of May's. Let's get you guys home. And when they see him, number one, May's like, well, how about that? The dude kept his promise. And everybody else is just kind of like, damn, it's Cyclops. Like, holy cow, right? Cyclops of the X-Men. They're totally swept up, right? They're just like fanboying out and fangirling out so bad. But while there is some measure of effort that's offered here, Donald Pierce shows up. And with his whole new suit of armor, he is not as easily defeated as he would traditionally be in Marvel Comics. But Cyclops is not deterred at all. When Donald Pierce goes to confront Scott, number one, he destroys Tearjerker, like literally rips him in half. Number two, May and all of her friends bail out of the cave. And then that's when the fight between Scott and Donald Pierce happens. because Donald Pierce is betting on something. Donald Pierce tells Scott, he says, "What were you thinking coming down here sightless and spent? You know that I'm gonna kill all those kids anyway, don't you?" Right? And Scott just says, "Not if I can stop you." And Donald says, "With what? A plasma cannon that I jerry-rigged together from lawnmower parts? Or the doomsday device in your face that you can't use without bringing an entire mountain down around both of us?" And he says, "That housebroken skunk bear of yours might be capable of something like that, but not you. You're the Boy Scout." And so Scott just kind of laughs at him. And Donald asks, like, "What are you laughing about?" And he says, "You don't know me, Pierce. You don't know me at all." And fires off his optic blast, and it just blows through the side of the mountain, risking collapsing the mountain on both of them. But because of the fact that Donald Pierce has Uru metal, it's not enough to defeat him. It cracks the armor just a little bit on the chest, but that's it. And so where Cyclops is being confronted by Pierce and he's about to get obliterated, May and the other members show up. And in fact, there's only two of them that show back up with her, really just the two powerhouses, if we want to call them that. The first one is Mateo, and it turns out he has heat vision. The second is Samira, who can dig through pretty much anything, right? She's described as a human tunneling machine. And so Cyclops, in hearing this, tells May, "Okay, for the next 30 seconds, I need you to operate as X-Men." And she says, "Sure." And Cyclops has them work together in unison. Strategy reigns supreme. He says, "Mateo, you have heat vision, target his eyes." Donald Pierce gets blasted in the face, that's the distraction. And he says, "May, get behind him while he's disoriented because you have super strength," which she does. And he says, "Lock him up." And so May puts him in a full Nelson, right? Literally locking his arms behind his back. And then Cyclops tells Samira, "Now, right, his chest plate, there should be a crack in the armor. Open it as wide as you possibly can," which she does. But the problem is that Donald Pierce is incredibly strong with these enhancements, and he breaks the hold of May, sends her flying. Samira's sent flying as well, but the mission is a success. Pierce has this giant gaping hole in his chest. And so Cyclops comes running up on him and says, "Pierce, are you ready to be impressed?" And fires off the optic blast into Pierce's chest and blows his body to pieces. It's not enough to kill him, but it is enough to take him out in the moment. And so when they go to leave, Pierce tells Cyclops, "I'm never going to stop. You know that, right? If you don't kill me, I will always come back. I will form new Reavers. I'll form hundreds. I'll form thousands, but I will come back for you and I will destroy you." And the response of Cyclops, "Maybe, but it won't be today." And just walks away while there's a cave-in, right? So seemingly it just leaves Donald Pierce to his fate. Now, of course, May ends up breaking through the rubble, which frees both Cyclops and herself. But then you switch back to the inside of the cave and you learn Tearjerker's not dead. Tearjerker's alive, and he's got a vendetta against Donald Pierce because Donald Pierce tried to kill him. He always told Tearjerker, "You're the special one," right? He was manipulating him the entire time, just like all the other Reavers. He never cared about any of the Reavers. And so when Tearjerker shows up here, he's like, "I don't like that name anymore, Mr. Pierce. Matter of fact, when I'm finished, I might just take yours, along with anything else that tickles my fancy," and starts tearing apart Donald Pierce and removing all of his enhancements. So presumably, Tearjerker is going to become the new Donald Pierce. But following that, Cyclops is able to make a rescue call to the X-Men, who show up here and basically rescue Scott. And where you do have May that wants to become a member of the X-Men, Cyclops basically tells her no. He says, "After Krakoa, everywhere felt hostile territory. I started to think of us all as an army, but I was wrong. What are we fighting for if not the right to build? You don't want to be an X-Man, May, so go, build, dance, live your life." And she asks, right, "What about you?" And he's like, "Oh, I'll be an X-Man so that you don't have to be, so you can go and live your life." And so, of course, May thanks him because she can live her own life, and Cyclops regroups with the X-Men. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. I told you, Cyclops without powers is amazing. This is a phenomenal story, and no one's talking about it. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.